It was a grey morning over the Baltic. The air was still too still. Then, at 4:45 a.m., the silence shook. The German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. That single thunderclap marked the beginning of mankind's deadliest chapter in the Second World War. For the Polish soldiers, it was a hopeless fight. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by a war machine that seemed unstoppable. Yet, they refused to surrender. Their stand would echo across Europe with a defiant spark in the darkness. But that opening bombardment wasn't just an attack. It was a signal, the first domino in a plan Hitler had spent years setting in motion. While shells rained down on Westerplatte, German divisions stormed the borders and Luftwaffe bombers painted the sky black over Warsaw. By noon, the world had changed forever. Still, hidden behind the headlines of invasion and chaos was a story rarely told of betrayals, secret plans, and quiet acts of courage that shaped the very first days of the war. And as the smoke rose from Poland's ruins, a few men on both sides began to realize something terrifying. This wasn't going to be another short campaign. This was going to consume the world. Poland's defenses were brave, but the German attack was unlike anything the world had seen. They called it Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. But to those on the ground, it felt less like lightning and more like the sky itself falling. Columns of panzers sliced through the countryside with terrifying precision. Behind them, waves of Stukas screamed down, their sirens designed to freeze men in terror before the bombs even hit. Communication lines vanished. Railways were ripped apart. In less than a week, Polish command had no idea where half its own army was. It wasn't just about speed, it was psychological warfare. The Germans attacked with clockwork coordination, tanks, aircraft, infantry, all moving as one, a relentless machine, and at the center of it all was a chilling belief that hesitation was weakness. While Polish soldiers fought with desperate courage, many using outdated rifles and even horses against tanks, the outcome was inevitable. By mid-September, the capital was under siege. Smoke turned the daylight orange. Civilians hid in basements as the ground trembled from constant bombing. But even as Warsaw burned, stories of unexpected defiance spread. Train engineers who derailed supply convoys, priests who smuggled wounded soldiers out of the city, pilots who stole aircraft to keep fighting from France and Britain. Their courage became legend. Yet, as the last Polish strongholds fell, another betrayal loomed, one that would stab Poland in the back and change the map of Europe forever. As Polish troops fought and died in the east, they kept looking west, waiting for help. Britain and France had promised to defend Poland if Germany attacked. But week after week, nothing came. In London and Paris, leaders declared war on Germany, then did almost nothing. The phony war, they called it, later speeches and paperwork, while Poland bled alone. But the worst betrayal didn't come from the West, it came from the East. On September 17, 1939, Soviet troops poured across Poland's border. Stalin's Red Army invaded without warning, not as saviors, but conquerors. For Polish soldiers, it was like being stabbed in the back mid-battle. Surrounded by two giants, they had no chance. In a few weeks, Poland was gone, split between two dictators who'd secretly agreed to carve it up in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Maps were redrawn, borders are erased, millions are displaced. And yet, among the ruins, Polish resistance was born. Underground networks, code breakers, couriers, and spies who refused to accept defeat. They smuggled intelligence to Britain, information that would one day help crack the German Enigma code. But for now, Europe stood silent. The world watched as a nation disappeared, and Hitler began looking west, toward France and Britain, convinced they wouldn't dare stop him. By the winter of 1939, Hitler's armies stood victorious in the east. But his real prize lay across the fields of France. While Europe waited for months in eerie quiet, the Sitzkrieg, they called it, Hitler was preparing something the Allies didn't expect. He wouldn't repeat the slow grind of the last war. This time, he'd go through Belgium, not the heavily fortified Maginot Line. When the storm finally broke in May 1940, it was chaos. German armor rolled through the Ardennes, a region the French believed was impassable for tanks. They were wrong. Within days, entire divisions were trapped. The Luftwaffe owned the skies, turning roads into firestorms. French soldiers fought bravely, but the Blitzkrieg sliced through their lines like a knife through paper. British troops were pushed back to the beaches of Dunkirk, clinging to survival under relentless air attacks. In 9 short weeks, France, one of the most powerful nations in Europe, was on its knees. Hitler's generals stood in awe. Even they hadn't expected such a swift victory. But behind the celebration was a dangerous illusion, the belief that Germany was unstoppable. That illusion would push Hitler to make the most reckless decision of his life. Because his next target wasn't France. It was the island nation that had defied every empire before its Britain summer. 1940. For the first time, Hitler faced an enemy he couldn't reach by land. To invade Britain, he had to first destroy the Royal Air Force. So, Luftwaffe came with hundreds of bombers, roaring across the Channel. Every day, they hit radar stations, airfields, factories, anything that could cripple Britain's defences. But standing in their path were the men Churchill called the few. Many were, barely in their 20s. Flying Hurricanes and Spitfires, they met the German formations head-on, often outnumbered 5-1. Dogfights erupted over the English countryside, the sky filled with twisting contrails and burning wrecks. Yet the RAF refused to break up. Radar gave them an edge, seeing enemy waves long before they arrived. And Britain's pilots fought with a ferocity that shocked even veteran German aces. Then, Hitler made his first major mistake. After a British raid on Berlin, he ordered revenge, shifting the Luftwaffe's focus from military targets to London itself. Night after night, the capital burned in what became known as the Blitz. But instead of breaking Britain's spirit, it hardened it. Ordinary citizens fought fires, sang in bomb shelters, and kept working even as the streets crumbled around them. And high above, the RAF slowly bled the Luftwaffe to dry. By October, Hitler realized the truth. He could bomb Britain, but he couldn't break it. The invasion was postponed indefinitely, and for the first time, the German war machine had been stopped. But in his frustration, Hitler turned his eyes east again toward the one campaign that would ultimately destroy him. June 1941. The calm over Europe shattered once again this time, not with thunder, but with Operation Barbarossa. Hitler had made his boldest and most catastrophic decision yet, to invade the Soviet Union. 3 million German soldiers, thousands of tanks, and the largest air armada in history poured across an 1,800-mile front. For a moment, it looked unstoppable. Cities fell like dominoes: Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev. Soviet armies were encircled, captured, and destroyed. German propaganda screamed victory. Berlin believed it was only a matter of weeks before Moscow would fall, but they misjudged everything: the vastness of Russia, the brutal winter, the endless reserves of men willing to die for their motherland. By December, temperatures plunged below -40. Engines froze, guns jammed, soldiers wrapped newspapers around their boots to survive. And then came the Soviet counterattack. Outside Moscow, fresh divisions struck back with ferocity the Germans had never faced. For the first time, Hitler's army retreated. That winter broke more than just a campaign. It broke the myth of German invincibility. And deep down, even his own generals began to realize the war they thought they'd win in months would now drag on for years. Years that would drown Europe in blood. By the time the guns fell silent in 1945, more than 70 million lives were gone. Cities are reduced to ash, borders are redrawn, empires are broken. It all began with that single morning shot over Westerplatte, with a sound that shattered not just peace, but innocence itself. Poland's stand, France's fall, Britain's defiance, Russia's endurance. Each chapter wrote a line on the cost of human pride and ambition. And yet, within the smoke and ruin, small lights never stopped burning, a pilot refusing to eject until his squadron escaped. A nurse pulling strangers from rubble, a resistance fighter sending one last message before capturing. The war showed mankind's darkest depths and its brightest courage. But the truth is, no one really won. They just survived. And as the world rebuilt, one lesson echoed louder than any victory parade. The moment nations believe they're invincible is the moment history beginning to repeat itself.